Hi everybody, this is Mike Pach with Three Peaks Photography. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about making panoramic images with your tracker. So you're going to use the tracker to create images of the sky, the night sky, with no movement in your stars. Then you're going to take some images without the tracker in order to stitch together for your foreground. I'm starting with a nice sturdy tripod. That's very important. You don't want a cheap tripod for this kind of work. You want something that's going to be very stable. This one happens to have a level on the top, which is really great, and it's necessary for you to level your tripod when you're doing panoramas. That's going to make everything stitch together really well. So it only takes a couple of moments to level your tripod, and we'll just pretend right now that that's level. The first thing I'm going to add to my tripod is my wedge. This is going to be critical for me to adjust my position, both my elevation and my side to side, when I'm lining up with Polaris. Using the wedge or a geared head is going to give you the best results. It's going to be easiest for you to align with the North Star if you're using the laser pointer or the polar scope. So I'm going to put this on here. Make sure that this is very tight and secure, so we don't want to have it move on us. So I'm going to flip my tripod around here so you can see the front adjustment knob for the elevation on the wedge. Normally here in the northern hemisphere we are adjusting or aligning to the North Star, and I want this knob pointing to the north. This makes things work out the way they should be when we're doing our alignment. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different, because when I've practiced making panoramas with my Move Shoot Move tracker, I noticed that it was easier for me to do it while setting it up a little bit differently than usual. So here's my tracker, and here's my mounting plate that attaches the tracker to the wedge. So you have two options when mounting the plate to the tracker. You can put it in this hole down on the bottom on the short side, or you can put it in this hole that's on the side opposite of the rotating plate. Okay. I noticed that when I put my plate on the short side and then mount my camera over here, it's a bit difficult for me to change the position of the camera when I'm going from one position to the next, making my panoramic images to stitch together. So I've discovered that if I attach the rotator to the wedge by this hole, things work out a bit easier. In order to use this hole, we need to use the 3/8 inch to 1/4 inch adapter, which I'm going to put in here right now. Okay, make sure that's nice and snug. So now I'm going to attach the plate to the tracker and make sure that it's lined up in the proper orientation, pretty much centering it onto the tracking device. I like to use a coin or a screwdriver to tighten these types of screws, because it's hard to get them tight when you're just using your fingers. So now I'm going to put the rotator onto the wedge like so. Make sure this is nice and tight. And I'm going to use this knob to adjust my elevation to align with the North Star. Okay. But before we do that, I'm going to put my head on. Make sure I don't strip the threads. There we go. This is a panoramic type ball head, so I have the ability to rotate around the base as well as around the upper clamp. And when I'm using this to make my panoramic images, I need to make sure that the slot in the ball head is positioned properly for me to get the shots that I want, the alignment that I need. So now that I have the head placed onto the tracker, I'm going to attach the camera. Oh, I need to make sure that this is really nice and snug. If it's not, it will slip. And I'm going to put the camera onto the head. Now usually when I'm doing panoramic images, I am shooting in a vertical position with a wide angle lens like this Tamron 15-30. But I just attached it horizontally just so you can see what it looks like. Now when I move the camera for each consecutive shot, I may need to adjust the position using the rotating abilities of my head, either around the base or around the upper clamp, or with the ball itself, or a combination of all three. Okay, so I also am going to attach my laser pointer, which I'll put on this side so that you can see it. And I'm going to use the laser pointer to point to the North Star. Again, we're here in the Northern Hemisphere. This is a knob for my declination. These two knobs are going to adjust my side to side to get my position accurate, lining up with the North Star. Now, what I have found, it's also really important that every time I move the camera in order to take another shot, my alignment with the North Star might slip. So each time I'm ready to take a new picture, I make sure that my alignment is good. Okay, a new tracked picture of the night sky. All right, it looks like we're ready to go, and we'll see what happens. All right, let's take a look again at all the equipment I have here in my setup. Nice sturdy tripod. I have leveled it with the level that's on the top. That's very important for panoramic images. I then have my wedge attached to the top of the tripod. I can also use a geared head if I wish. Then I have the rotator attached to the wedge, but I have it attached to the side that's opposite of the rotating plate instead of attached to the short side. Normally I have it attached to the short side, but because I'm doing panoramas and I found that this configuration is easier for me to use, it works out better, this is how I've attached it. Then I have my ball head attached to the rotating plate on the rotator, and then the camera attached to the ball head, plus my laser pointer, which I'm going to use for aligning to the North Star. So let's take a look at the images that I captured to create my panorama. I have two rows. One row was shot with the tracker on, my Move Shoot Move tracker, in order to capture the stars with no movement. But because I have movement in my foreground as a result of using the tracker, I had to shoot a second row that was created just for the foreground. So we're going to create two different panoramas, and then we're going to blend those together inside of Photoshop. One thing you'll notice is that I have vertical frames. And if you're photographing with a super wide angle lens, it's recommended that you shoot vertical frames instead of horizontal frames, because the distortions you get from the optics of those lenses generally appears towards the edges of the photos, the corners. So when you position your camera, when you make your composition, if you have enough room above and below your subject, when you make the stitch, then you will end up with a sweet spot in the middle that you just crop out, or you crop out the stuff around that, and you end up with a great photograph. So I'm going to show you a couple different ways to get these photos merged together in Photoshop's photo merge function. Right now I'm inside of Bridge, and I'm a Bridge Camera Raw Photoshop user. So if you're a Lightroom user, you can adjust your workflow accordingly. But usually what I do when I'm working in Bridge, I'm going to label the images that I'm going to use to put my panorama together. So the first row I've just labeled with 2 stars. Each of those photos have a 2-star rating. And I'm going to go up to the Tools menu and select Photoshop, and then select Photo Merge. This is going to take me into Photoshop and open the Photo Merge dialog box. You can see the list of all of the files that are going to be stitched together. And also one thing to note is that I didn't do any Camera Raw edits inside of Camera Raw at this point. I'm going to do them later, and I'm going to show you how to do that within Photoshop. In the left-hand column, I have different choices of the ways that I can lay out my panorama. And I have found from my experience, usually the one that works the best is auto. If auto doesn't work, then I'll try reposition. Sometimes reposition is the better choice. And I usually don't check any of these boxes, but you're certainly welcome to try to do those. If something doesn't work well, you can try checking any of these boxes and see if they help fix the issue that is coming up for you. So once I have all of my files selected, then I just click the OK button, and Photoshop does its thing and stitches those photos together. This will take a couple minutes, but we're going to skip forward in the video so that you can see the final stitch. Okay, so here's my resulting panorama, and you can see it looks kind of weird. And also the picture itself looks a little dull and lifeless. That's because we haven't done any edits yet in Camera Raw. So this is what I was talking about when you shoot with a super wide angle lens or an ultra wide angle lens, and you do vertical shots and stitch them together. You get these weird distortions around the edges, but you have this sweet spot in the middle, and all you have to do is crop that out. So what I'm going to do next is utilizing a keyboard shortcut to merge all of these layers together. You can see all of my layers in my layers panel here. These are the different frames that are stitched together, including their masks. And I'm going to go ahead and merge all these into one so I can edit just that one layer. And the keyboard shortcut for that is Control-Alt-Shift-E, or on a Mac, it's Command-Option-Shift-E. Now I have a single layer that has all of the other layers merged together, and I can make my crop right here if I want to. So I already have my crop tool active. If you don't have yours active, you can just hit the C on the keyboard to select it. I have in my options bar all of the parameters here cleared out. If you have any numbers in these fields, just hit the clear button to get rid of those. And then I'm just going to draw my crop box in an appropriate place to make sure that I get rid of these transparent edges and that I maximize the amount of information that is in the final photograph. So let me move this up a little bit, and that looks pretty good. So you hit the little check mark in the options bar to accept the crop, and there you go. That looks a whole lot better than what we started with. So my next step here is that I'm going to go ahead and make my Camera Raw edits. So in order to do that, I'm going to first go up to the filter menu and choose Convert for Smart Filters. This is going to change this layer into a smart object, which then makes the filters I use smart filters. And this is a non-destructive way of working inside of Photoshop. So if I save this file as a Photoshop file, those layers remain intact and the filters remain intact, and I can go back to them and re-edit if I need to. So I'm going to click Convert for Smart Filters, click OK with the box that pops up. And now I'm going to go back to the filter menu and choose Camera Raw Filter. And look what happens here. This brings us into the Camera Raw dialog box. And if you're familiar with using Camera Raw or Lightroom, I have all of the tools that I normally have in Camera Raw or in Lightroom, minus the crop tool. So I did my crop earlier. So I'm going to just make some adjustments here, pump up my exposure a bit. I like using the dehaze filter. That kind of helps my Milky Way, my stars to pop out against the night sky. I also like to add a little bit of a clarity that helps my Milky Way core come out. Add a little contrast. And that's looking a lot better than when we started. If I hit this toggle button here in the bottom right, it switches me back and forth between the before and after. I'm going to go into the curves panel and just take the lights and slide them up a bit. This kind of helps to make the core pop out a little bit. And I can tell you on this night we had a lot of moisture in the air, so the Milky Way wasn't as visible as it usually is. And you'll also notice that my barn looks a little bit fuzzy. That's because I was using my Move Shoot Move tracker and foreground objects, because the camera is actually moving with long exposures, are gonna look fuzzy. So this is why we do a second row of shots with the tracker turned off. Let's go back to the basics panel. I'm gonna draw down to highlights a little bit to take out a little bit of that light pollution there on the left hand side. Once I'm finished with all of my edits here using the Camera Raw filter, I'm just going to go down to the bottom and click OK, or hit the Enter key on my keyboard. And that's looking a lot better than when we first started. So if you're shooting in Camera Raw, your night sky images are going to look kind of dull, and they really do need some help. So if I want to see what those changes have done to my image, I can just go down to where it says Camera Raw Filter in my layers panel. You can see now I have a smart filter added, and that filter is the Camera Raw filter. If I click the eyeball icon here, that is the visibility icon. It toggles the filter on and off. And if I want to go ahead and make further edits, maybe I don't quite like what happened, I want to make some further changes, all I have to do is double click where it says Camera Raw Filter, and my Camera Raw filter will come up again, and all of the changes that I made will still be there. So I can re-edit those, add some other changes if I want to. Okay. So from here, I'm going to save this as a Photoshop file or a PSD file. So I'm going to go to Save As, and then make sure I'm saving this on my computer. And then choose the appropriate folder, and I can name it if I want. So I'm just going to cancel out of this because I have another file that I already made that we're going to use for blending the two panoramas together. I also have the second set of images that I need to stitch together for the second panorama for the foreground. These are the ones where the tracker was turned off, and I did another sweep so that I could get a nice sharp foreground. And these are the ones here marked with 3 stars. And these were shot at f2.8 at 15 seconds, ISO 3200. I'll be honest with you, I did these in a hurry. This was on one of my workshops, and my students were anxious to get to our next location, so I just did a quick run through to get these shots for my foreground. Normally I would use the same shutter time and other settings for my foreground images as I do for my tracked sky images. The only difference is that the tracker is off, so the camera is not moving. So you'll see movement in the stars, but your foreground will be nice and sharp. So I told you I'd show you how to do this in Photoshop. So if I go over to Photoshop and go to the File menu, File, then Automate, then Photo Merge down at the bottom. I get the Photo Merge dialog box. Then I can search for files or folders. So if I put my images to stitch together for this panorama in a folder, then that makes them a little bit easier to find. But I click the Browse button in order to search for the folder on my computer. And this happens to be the right folder. And I'm looking for 3640 through 3647. So I have XMP files here with the raw files. That's because I added my copyright information when I loaded the photos into Camera Raw, or Bridge rather. But if I hit OK, you'll notice that the XMP files don't show up in the list here. So that's another reason that I do my Camera Raw edits after the panorama is stitched together. So I have all my files here ready to go. This is the same as what we did before with the first panorama, and I can just click OK and have the have Photoshop stitch the photos together. I'm not going to go through this process right now because I already made the second panorama that we use for our foreground, and I'm just going to pull that up here so you can get a look at that. Okay, so if you look at my layers panel, you can see that I have all 7 images here in separate layers with their accompanying masks. And I did the same thing I did before, where I merged all these layers together with that keyboard shortcut, Control Alt Shift E or Command Option Shift E on a Mac. I converted the layer to a smart object so I can use smart filters, and I added a Camera Raw filter to make my adjustments. Now if you look at this, you can see that my barn looks nice and sharp, but if we zoom in, we should probably see some movement in the stars. So a little bit of movement in the stars, even though this was just a 15-second exposure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this panorama and the panorama that we made earlier, and I'm going to stitch them together. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So here's that first panorama. This is the one with the tracker on. So this is my track sky. You can see my barn's a little bit fuzzy. And then over here I have the other one that I just made, the second panorama with the tracker off. This is for my foreground. So I'm going to take this layer and the layer from this panorama, and I'm going to put them into another document, and then I'm going to blend them together. So here's how we do that. So I'm going to go over to the layer menu, and I'm going to choose duplicate layer. I can create a name for that layer if I want to. I'm just going to leave that alone at this point. And then I'm going to go down here where it says destination document, and I'm going to choose new. So we're creating a new document, and select that and click OK. Now you see we have a new document that's named Untitled 1, and we have our layer. This is our tracked sky layer. So I'm going to actually name this now. I could have named it earlier. So this is going to help me. I am going to name it tracked sky. So it makes it easier for me to understand then what's on this layer. Now I'm going to go over to the second panorama that I made. This is the one for the foreground, and make sure that my top layer is highlighted, that's the one that's active. I'm going to do the same thing, layer, duplicate layer. This time from my destination document menu, I'm going to choose Untitled 1. That's that new document that we just made, and click OK. This takes a little while because these files are pretty big, and it also renders the filters every time you do something like this. All right, so now in my Untitled 1 document, I have the tracked sky layer, and the layer that I just placed onto it, this was my foreground. So I am going to rename this. By the way, if you noticed how I did that, I just double click on the layer name. It opens the field for you to type in, and I'm going to name this foreground. This is going to make it easier for me to know what's on each layer. So this is my foreground. This is my sky. Okay, and I can turn on and off the visibility if I want. You notice that they don't exactly line up because the camera was moved when I took these pictures. So that's not really that big of a deal. The next step is to select the sky in one of these layers. So let's try the first one, the foreground, and I'm going to go to the select menu and choose sky. This is one of the newer tools inside of Photoshop. It usually works pretty well. So let's see what happens. That's not a really great job. It selected quite a bit of the barn, like about half of the barn. I could certainly fix that if I went to my quick selection tool, and I would, in this case, I would have to hold down my Alt or Option key to nudge that back. But that's a little bit more work, and let's just scrap this for now and see how it works on the other layer. So Controller Command D will get rid of your marching ants, your selection area. And I'm going to go over, I'm going to take and make the first layer invisible by clicking on the eye icon, the visibility icon. Then I'm going to click on the tracked sky layer to activate it. That's the active layer now. And I'm going to do the same thing, select sky, and see if this works any better. That looks better. So this is going to give me a better starting point to work with. So let's go with this right now. So this is my tracked sky. So I want to keep the sky and I want to hide the foreground. So what I do now is go to the select menu again, and I want to choose select and mask. This is also a fairly new feature inside of Photoshop that allows you to refine your selections. I'm in the select and mask dialog box right now. I can use any of these tools here to refine my edge. The refine edge brush tool works pretty well. This is especially helpful if you're doing something that has a lot of jagged trees, or if you're working in portraits and you have somebody with curly hair. This can be very helpful. I've also noticed that doing images like this, when you have a dark sky and you have objects like trees against that sky, it's better to choose color aware for your refine mode than object aware. So I'm going to click color aware, and then I'm going to just bring my radius up to 1 here. This is going to smooth out my selection a little bit. And down at the bottom where it says output to, this is really important, click on the pop-up menu, and I'm going to choose layer mask. So I want to turn the selection into a layer mask so that I can refine it or edit it later. So click that and then click OK. And now you notice that we have a layer with a layer mask, and we have our sky that is visible, and that's actually what we want. However, we want to bring this to the bring this layer to the top of our layer stack. So all I do is click and hold and grab somewhere in the gray area, slide this up until I see the double blue line. That means I'm okay to drop it and change its position. Now I have it at the top of the stack, and then I'm going to turn the visibility on for our lower layer. Now this looks pretty weird at this point because the two pictures are not aligned, and something funky happened over here in the bottom right corner with my crops, but we can fix that later. So I'm going to take the opacity on the top layer and turn it down a bit so that I can see where that line is, the roof line is for the barn. And then I'm going to click on my bottom layer, hit the V key to change to the move tool, and then I can use my arrow keys, use my down arrow key and my left and right keys to align this, align the two roof lines together, and that looks pretty close. So I turn my opacity back up. Okay, and now I've got some work to do with my edge here. So I'm gonna bump this up a bit and align this a little bit better so I have less work to do, and that looks pretty good. I need to zoom in a bit. And then I'm going to work on the mask for the top layer. That's not too bad. Let's see what happens here when we work on the mask. So in order to work on the mask, you need to click on it so that these white corners appear to highlight the mask. Then you notice your foreground and background colors change to black and white. I need the brush tool, so B is the keyboard shortcut for the brush tool. And anything that I paint with black, I am going to hide from the top layer and let the lower layer show through. Anything I paint with white is going to allow that from the top layer, whatever's in the top layer, to be visible. So let's just see what happens here when I use my black brush along this line here. You see that I am really affecting the sky, and I don't want to do that. So I want to make sure that my brush is a small enough size and paint it around here on the edge of the barn. And anytime I need to refine this, I'm going to switch back and forth between the white and the black by using the keyboard shortcut X, and then I can touch this up here and make sure that I have this looking really good. So I'm just doing this pretty quickly right now for the purposes of this video, and let's go over to the other side of the barn there. Flip over again to black by clicking X and just running my brush down that edge, making sure I've got a good line on that roof, and flip back to white to clean this edge up a little bit. Okay, and this tree here is a little bit of a problem, so let's see what happens when we paint over it with white. Not sure I like that. Let's see what happens if we paint over it with black. Yeah, black's looking a little better because that's the non-tracked version of the image. So, and I also have a little problem here with the lights in the background. So I'm painting with black along this horizon line to get rid of that stuff. That looks pretty good. Gotta fix this one over here. Fix the roof line of this building. That's looking pretty good. Let's go over to the left side. Oh, we got a bit of a problem here with more lights in the mountains. So again, I'm painting with black so that I want to show what's in the non-tracked layer, the layer that's in the bottom. And you can see that I need to clean up my horizon a little bit. So I'll go back with that, back along that with the white brush. Clean this up a little bit. Go all the way over to my edge. And then this bright light right here, that's one of my LED panels that I use to illuminate the barn. And I'm going to show you how to get rid of that. So switch back to white, then just clean up this horizon line a little bit. Get this looking good. I can spend a lot of time refining these edges. I can go back into the select and mask tool and work on that too if I want to. Oops, I got a little bit of a problem there, so I'm going to go back to the black brush, and that's not going to work. Control Z to get rid of that. So I'm going to make the brush smaller so that I can fix those problems there without causing others. Okay, switch back to white. Fix that little bit of a color difference there, and it looks like I have a little bit of trouble with this, so I'm going to need to go in and clean that up with my spot healing brush tool. But I'm gonna leave that alone for now, just for the purposes of the video. But that's further work that I'll need to do to clean this up and make it look the best I can. A little bit of an issue there. Another thing I could do is just move my one layer a little bit. You know how they didn't line up too well. I can do that, but might not be worth the trouble. Just gonna clean this up a little bit. Oops, looks like I took out the corner of the roof there. There we go. That's better. All right, that looks pretty good. I have a little bit of touch-up work to do, but for the purposes of the video, this is looking really good. Let's zoom back out to fill in screen, and that looks pretty good. So I have my upper layer, which is my track sky. I could turn that on and off. And I have my lower layer, which is my foreground. Turn that on and off. So if I want to leave the bottom layer off, I can further clean this up. You can see that I've got some places where the foreground is showing through a little bit, and I can use my brush tool on that mask to clean that up a little bit. So I can do that. So you get the idea here. If you're not familiar with working with masks, then I recommend that you check out some tutorial videos and get yourself some practice doing those things. All right, that looks pretty good. The last thing I wanted to show you was how to get rid of this spot of light here. So normally I would use my spot healing brush tool. So J is the keyboard shortcut for that. And then I would just click on here to fix that, make my brush an appropriate size and click on here. But you see when I do that, nothing's happening. And the reason for that is that my layer is actually a smart object. So this tool does not work on smart objects. What I have to do is I have to create a new layer. So I'm going to go down to, oh, actually I can't do that because my controls for the video are blocking that option. So I'm going to go up to the layer menu and choose new layer. Click OK. And now this will allow me to do those types of corrections on this new layer as long as I have this little checkbox clicked that says sample all layers. So when I go now over the light and click on it, now it gets fixed. And I can use the spot healing brush as well as the clone stamp in the same method. And this is actually a non-destructive way of doing these types of corrections. So because this is on a separate layer, if I turn this on and off, you can see what I have fixed. And if I, for some reason, decide I don't want to keep those changes, I can just get rid of them. So I can do further edits if I want. Those little areas here where I needed to clean up, I can do those on that separate layer as well. So, all right, now the last thing I need to do is just save this. So I'm going to do File, Save As, and make sure I'm saving to my computer, and make sure that PSD is the file type that's selected. Usually when you have multiple layers, that's the default for saving when you choose Save As. And since I already have this saved, I'm not going to go through the process, but you would click Save, and then there you go. And if you wanted to make further edits to those camera raw changes, all you have to do is click on the camera raw filter, and the camera raw filter dialog box comes up and you can make further edits. So there you go. This is a panorama made with the move, shoot, move rotator. Two panoramas actually blended together. One panorama with the tracker on for the sky so that I have no movement in my stars, and then one panorama with the tracker off so I have a nice sharp foreground. Well, have fun with your tracker and with your Photoshop use. I hope that you get some great images the next time you go out, and that you find this information in this video useful. And I usually like to use a coin to tighten these types of screws because it's pretty difficult to get them tight with just your fingers, and I just lost a quarter. So next what we're gonna do is mount the tracker. Dang it, I mounted it the wrong way and I actually did lose a quarter. Hi everybody, this is Mike Pach with 3 Peaks Photography. In this video I'm going to go through all the steps of making a panoramic image with tracked shots for the sky and untracked shots for your foreground. So I'm going to show you here what I'm going to do for my setup for my rotator. So here's my handy sturdy tripod. It's very important to have a sturdy tripod for this type of work. This one has a level on the top, which is great for me to do squirrel